Yeah. So, where to start? Well, maybe I'll just say a little bit about the flip chart. So I don't know whether I'm going to use the flip chart or not. So it's kind of there, and it might get used and it might not. But in a certain sense, maybe that's quite nice in the sense of, because what the title for today's thing, don't even know whether I can call it a talk, is pauses and empty spaces. So that is an empty space, isn't it? Maybe something will appear on it and maybe something won't. It depends a bit where the talk kind of heads. And I suppose the kind of idea for the talk came from a number of places. So the first place was, I was sat in bed at home and I've been carving a piece of wood, and I was looking at this carving that I've done, and what my attention alighted on, kind of focused on, was the space. And there was a kind of sense of like that the form has emerged from the space. So I've removed some wood and now there's a form, and it's happened through this thing of taking something away. Whether that's relevant or not, I don't know, but it is in a certain sense. And then that got me thinking about this particular essay. So Sangharakshita gave an essay which is called Pauses in Empty Spaces. So I'll come back to Sangharakshita in a minute. And then the other thread from today is, so Lalita Ratna encouraged me to give a talk, partly because I've been away from the centre for I was here last week, but I was away for 8 weeks. So I was away for 8 weeks because I was doing some training. And I was doing some training with an organisation or charity called Breathworks. And they run courses, so I've been kind of training with them to teach 2 courses. So to teach a mindfulness for stress course and a mindfulness for health course. And I was away because I was supporting a mindfulness for health course. And I would say that one of the takeaways that I got from doing those courses is something to do with how do I maintain my awareness, or how do I maintain mindfulness throughout the day. And I think partly because particularly the mindfulness for health course, they're working with people with chronic pain. So a lot of them cannot sit for very long. Yeah. So it's like the meditations are quite short, maybe 10 minutes, maybe shorter sometimes, because of that. But the advantage of that is that you can slot these meditations in throughout the day. You can do a number of them. So you can sit, maybe you do your own practice if you're sitting for longer in the morning, but you can also punctuate the day with other practices. And they also talk about what they call habit releases. So something that you do during the day, it kind of reinforces what has been going on with what's been getting taught. I'm not quite sure why it's called habit release in a certain sense. Obviously, it's something to do with releasing habits. But there's a number of these. So each week you're doing a meditation practice, you're doing a habit releaser, and maybe you're doing some reading. And this particular week, we was doing this practice, which was called Stop, Look and Listen. That's what the practice was called, Stop, Look and Listen. And, well, I really enjoyed it, yeah. And it sort of reaffirmed something that I was already doing and really enjoy, which is stopping, so just sitting and doing nothing. And the look and listen part was paying attention to the senses. Yeah, so very consciously bringing your awareness into hearing or into seeing. So that's what I was doing, and I kind of thought that I wanted to say that, and I wanted to kind of give you this kind of practice as something to do throughout the week, because I think it's a practice which really, well, it opens things up, and it supports your meditation practice. And it partly supports your meditation practice because you're coming back to what is primary within experience. So when we do the mindfulness of breathing, we are coming in relationship to something which is primary. We're coming into relationship to a movement of the breath in the body. Yeah, it's a form of sense contact, the movement of the breath in the body. Just as looking is a sense contact, hearing is a sense contact, taste is a sense contact. And it's pre-thought. Like in Buddhism, this is the reason why I was wondering about using the flip chart. In Buddhism, they talk about that there's a kind of sequence of events which goes contact, which is contact through the senses, feeling, pleasant, painful or neutral. That's what arises when we see something or hear something or taste something. And then it kind of goes in different ways depending on the model. So one of the ways it goes is from feeling arises craving, if it's pleasant feeling, or aversion if it's unpleasant feeling. And then there's grasping and becoming. So paying attention to the senses takes us right back to the beginning of that sequence. And it's kind of said that the first two, contact and feeling, well, I suppose like if you can stay there, you're more in the present moment. Yeah. So if you notice that that's where you are when you tune into your experience, you know that you're more in the present moment. And in dependence on that comes more secondary experience. You start thinking about things, you start worrying about things, you start getting anxious about things. Yeah. Somebody says something that you don't like, you hear it, sense contacts of hearing, the feeling is unpleasant, but then it's like, do you just stop there or do you carry on? Well, most of the time we go right the way through that sequence very fast. Yeah. Suddenly we're thinking, we're worrying, we're defending. It's what last week Vardhaka talked about. He just mentioned it really, he didn't really go into it in detail, but he talked about this teaching of the two arrows. So the teaching of the two arrows is that you experience feeling, particularly with unpleasant feeling, that's the first arrow, bang, yeah. You see something, somebody looks a bit, I don't know, harsh or stern or whatever. Maybe your feeling is unpleasant, that's the first arrow, bang. And then the second arrow is then your reaction to that. Yeah, you kind of you start worrying about that, you start defending yourself. That's the second arrow. And the second arrow doesn't have to be there. Yeah, you can actually, if you stay with sense contact and feeling, the second arrow doesn't arise. Or if you notice that you're in feeling, in thought and emotion, you can bring yourself back to sense contact. So the practice that I would encourage you to do over this next week, I was kind of thinking about doing it, but I wonder whether it'll be a bit too squeezed for time, is just give yourselves 5 minutes. So set your alarm on your phone, just 5 minutes or 10 minutes, and just try and pay attention to one of the senses. So the way I've been doing it is I've just been sat on the couch, relax, open the window, look out the window. I've been kind of using both sight and sound. And just pay attention, just keep on bringing yourself back to the sense contact. And it kind of, it's quite a, in a certain way, it's quite a profound practice. I suppose what it started to get me thinking was that inherent within awareness, so this is what I think, is a quality which, that inherent is in awareness is this sense of appreciation and a sense of that awareness can align itself with beauty. And that happens, I think, when we're able to stay just with the senses. So I suppose, like for me, doing this practice, I'm just sat and I'm listening, kind of sound of cars, little kids on the street, kind of whatever it might be. I kind of a pigeon across the way, and I got fascinated by this pigeon, just watching this pigeon. Not necessarily with that much interpretation. Like there wasn't that much thinking going on. And what started to happen was just this sense of, God, beauty. Yeah, this kind of movement of this bird, kind of on the other side of the, across the way from me. It's the way its kind of form was changing as it moved, the kind of the colour, the light, all of the rest of it. There was a kind of beauty which was kind of there within experience. So what I'm saying is that if you can do that, beauty begins to emerge. Yeah. And also, so I'm just wondering where this is going to go. Like generally when we teach meditation, the kind of you could say the foundation that we teach in a certain way is body awareness. Yeah, it's a very good foundation to teach, like a very good first principle. But really the basis of meditation is awareness. That is kind of like what is the ground of it, really. And I think this practice of just listening, it kind of somehow allows you to rest a bit more in your awareness, just in this sense of this open space where things come and go. And I think this is partly what Sangharakshita is getting at in this pauses and empty spaces. It's a bit like he takes what I'm saying and really opens it up into something a lot bigger. So the other thing that I wanted to do, part of the reason why, well, I was just got interested in this particular essay and then I looked at the essay, but part of the reason why I wanted to look at it is to encourage you to get to know Sangharakshita. So Sangharakshita is the founder of this particular tradition. He's my and other people's teacher. He's not alive. But I suppose if you want to get more involved with Triratna, this particular tradition, you really need to read him. Yeah. And I kind of thought I'd show you a picture. So the essays that so I'm actually going to read this essay because it's very short. The essays were put together in the 1940s and 1950s, and at this point Sangharakshita was a monk, and he'd gone to India and he had wandered. He'd taken on the kind of the yellow robes and he'd wandered, and then at some point he was ordained into the Theravada tradition. So this is a picture, I imagine, of him round about that time. Yeah, kind of shaven-headed, quite young, with his robes on. And it was quite a time. It's like, well, at this point, there is no Triratna. That hasn't come into existence. He's on his own. He's wandering. He wants to take ordination. He studies kind of with a Buddhist teacher called Jagdish Kashyap. And then he settles in a place called Kalimpong. And he's writing for various, well, not just him, he's writing for various kind of magazines, Buddhist magazines of the time. So this is where this essay comes from. And the essays are in this book, Crossing the Stream. It's a fantastic little book, actually. These very, very short, very pithy teachings that have kind of got a real lot in them. And it's a particular time of Sangharatsta's life. So I'm just going to read this. Maybe I'll say a little bit about it, or maybe we'll just... I probably will say a little bit about it. But I want to hear from you as well. So it's called Pauses and Empty Spaces. When the composer Mozart was asked what was the most important part of his music, he did not reply that melody or harmony or counterpoint or even orchestration was the most important, but simply the pauses. As in the music of Mozart, so in the paintings of the Far Eastern, Chinese and Japanese masters of the art of landscape. It is the empty spaces which are the most important parts of the picture. The vast empty spaces of sky or snow or water are not only themselves charged with mysterious significance as a cloud with lightning, but they somehow infuse that significance into the single blossomless branch, or tiny floating boat, or solitary human figure, which stands almost lost at the edge or in the centre of the huge blank expanse of paper, or faintly tinted silk. And just as the pauses are the most important part of music, and the empty spaces the most important part of a picture, so are silence and emptiness the most important part of life. A life which consists of a frantic stream of external activities without one moment of inward reflection is like music, which is an uninterrupted succession of sounds, or a picture which is crammed with figures. All three are not only meaningless, but positively painful. As music is born of silence and derives its significance therefrom, and as painting is born of empty space and derives its significance therefrom, so are our lives born of silence, of stillness, of quietude of spirit, and derive their significance, their distinctive flavour and individual quality therefrom. The deeper and more frequent are those moments of interior silence and stillness, wherein transcending all sights and sounds, tastes and touches, we experience reality as it is. The more rich in significance, the more truly meaningful will our lives be. It has been said that there is a silence of words, a silence of desires, and a silence of thoughts. Only when the egoistic will itself is silent, that is, no longer operative, will be heard the true sound. Only when our hearts are utterly empty of all self-will shall we behold the true form. And since this silence and emptiness are not states of mere negation, but dynamic and full of life, our thoughts and words and deeds, even the most insignificant, will be charged with a mysterious potency, like 2 or 3 notes of a flute sounding in the midst of a great pause in a symphony, or a few delicate twigs sketched in the corner of an else empty scroll. Truly did a Chinese sage say that it is only because of empty space that the wheel is able to revolve and houses to be made use of. It is the pauses which make beautiful the music of our lives. It is the empty spaces which give richness and significance to them. It is stillness which makes them truly useful. So I'll just read that last few lines again. It is the pauses which make beautiful the music of our lives. It is the empty spaces which give richness and significance to them. And it is stillness which makes them truly useful. Maybe that's it. Well, I suppose it kind of like to go back a bit to kind of what I was saying before, this kind of encouragement that I want to give you to punctuate your day with not doing. Punctuate your day with pauses. Punctuate your day with empty spaces. I know that's not always easy, but I suppose it's like even 5 minutes, when you kind of consciously choose to do that, can have quite a profound effect, actually. And I think it's interesting, this link that Sangharakshita is making in the sense of, to me, that there is a connection between pauses and empty spaces and beauty. So he's talking about the beauty of music, the beauty of landscape, and actually that the significance comes from the fact that there is space kind of within that. So I think for me that tells me something, that space is significant, kind of empty space is significant. And even if you're just using what I'm saying, this sense of like just pausing throughout the day, even if that is just a rest, actually resting is also important, actually. Like sometimes when I've been doing this practice, I've just kind of like dozed. Probably tells me something about how I am. It's like kind of I'm a bit tired, I need to rest a little bit. So that's all right, but actually it's like kind of like, well, just keep on punctuating your day with some space. Yeah, there's probably more that I could say, but I think what I'm going to do is just, sometimes I overrun, I'm just going to give you guys lots of space actually, just to, well, see what struck you, and whether there are any questions, and I imagine that will also spark kind of me off a little bit. So it might be from what I've said, it might be from what Sangharakshita has also said, kind of in that essay. Yeah.
Did Sangharakshita know Thich Nhat Hanh? As I went to Plum Village once, and they have this bell system where they ring these bells, and you have to kind of stop whatever you're doing and stand there. So they enforce physically for the whole community this idea that is embossed in the passage, and it was a very beautiful experience, and quite impressive how a whole order can, and everybody who arrived, children did it. I mean, they also have lots of family meetings there, which I was always very impressed by, that they managed to incorporate different sections of society into Plum Village. I just wondered if Sangharakshita knew Thich Nhat Hanh, went to his talks. He probably did. I mean, they were of the same generation.
Well, he knew him,
No.
and he was kind of a.
They were on the same platform in conferences.
Oh, they were. Right, there we go.
Yeah.
That was in Berlin I think at least once.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
So it was a line of thought that was powerful in different kind of organisations from the Middle East that were coming to the West.
Well, I think in a way it's like it's kind of if you practice Buddhism, it's kind of like not necessarily the external, like kind of like, okay, so you're going to be working with a bell which is going to tell you to stop. But I think again, this is part of the reason why I was interested in this. It's like, well, this has meaning for me. Yeah. It's like, and I think part of, like, particularly if you do things like solitary retreats, in a certain way, it's like this is what you're doing. You meditate and you do puja and you study. But also, maybe you go for walks. But you're also giving yourself lots of space to not do, actually. To just sit and just watch and just look. And I think for me as well, the kind of connection with Sangharakshita, particularly with this piece, is that he's also a poet. So he really had this, at some point he had this sense of the synthesis between art and the spiritual life, and art and beauty and kind of meditation and kind of art, as in music, poetry, painting, kind of sculpture. It's a bit like he really got that, and I think there's something really in that, in the sense of that sense of how can we live a life where our relationship to the world is more aesthetic, is more a relationship of kind of appreciation and beauty.
Yes, I had a question about this kind of principle that you were talking about with a sensation and then feeling and then thoughts arising out of that. Something that I've never quite understood is that I would feel like there's a certain use to say if someone is treating me in a way that is painful for me, and or even it doesn't have to be physical, but just like emotionally somehow this situation is painful, and that's like the sensation, and then I have an aversion to that. And I feel like sometimes, or I would assume that is also can be useful, because then you feel like I'm not going to allow this to happen again, because I feel an aversion towards it, and I'm like clear about what needs to change so that this doesn't happen again.
Yeah.
Whether that is somehow in conflict with if I just feel the pain and just kind of feel like, okay, this is uncomfortable, but then not maybe have that aversion thought or like keep that from happening again. Like, how does that work if you're not having the aversive reaction to it?
Yeah. Well, probably for most of us, we're more like we're with you. Basically, it's like kind of our, like I said, this sequence happens like that normally. Like kind of somebody says something, we feel pain, and we react. We shout or whatever. So I suppose it's like, and people are different with that, aren't they? I would say that some people are more fighters, and some people are a bit more. They take it inward, and maybe they don't say anything. Yeah, both things are kind of like don't work really. Well, they work to a certain extent, don't they? Because the other person knows. I think it's very. Like I was thinking in what you said. Well, there is an element of loving kindness in there, isn't there? Like kind of we have to assert our boundaries when somebody does something which causes us pain. Ideally, they need to know that. If they don't know that, they might just keep on doing it. That to me is an act of loving kindness. If we're in a situation where someone is constantly causing us pain, physically or emotionally, kind of, it's like, well, we have to make a choice, don't we, based on kindness, whether we stay in that situation or we leave. That again to me is an act of kindness. So I suppose like kind of in terms of the sequence, again, it's quite a profound thing, isn't it? It's like the state of enlightenment is said to be a state of non-hatred. So it's like, so to be enlightened, there would not be the reaction, there would not be the fear in relationship to the person, kind of the aggressor. There'd just be kindness. That doesn't necessarily mean that somebody that was enlightened would not also tell the person that they're being unskillful, yeah, or what they're doing is causing harm. But I suppose it's like kind of like where we're at. It's more like we're probably, somebody says something, and then we're straight into aversion and probably hatred and kind of defending. It's like, well, it works to some extent because the person knows, oh, okay, I've stepped over the line there. But it's like it's a cyclical thing which reinforces a habit. It makes us more and more prone to hating that person. So I suppose it's like in the metabhavana, it's like the fourth stage of the metabhavana is you bring the person to mind. In a way, you're working with that process. You bring the person to mind, that's contact. You experience the felt sense of that, which is unpleasant feeling. And you're trying to have a space where there's some choice. And you're noticing, well, do I straight away go into the fantasy of defense? Yeah? If I do, I'll pull myself back. This is why I work in the metabhavana with the fourth stage. I pull myself back to feeling, unpleasant feeling in my body. And it's kind of like sometimes I think we have to soothe that actually. Like kind of we have to bring kindness to that in ourselves, hold that for ourselves, and then over time it's like you probably know yourself, I imagine. It's like anybody that's I think practiced the metabhavana over a period of time will have had moments where their aversion has lessened or their relationship with the so-called enemy person has completely changed. That kind of, they might irritate you again, and then you go through the same process again. But I don't know, is that helpful?
Yeah, I guess it was just the question on kind of like drawing boundaries and
Yeah,
how that
yeah.
relates. But I guess
Yeah, I think drawing boundaries is very important.
I'm thinking of the concrete practice of three qualities. So I imagine or I wonder if I do practice the pause, I simultaneously practice empty space, and I do practice at the same time silence. So the three qualities are in the end one quality. I do practice in those 5 minutes you just played.
The three qualities of one practice, did you say? Yeah, they're all in there, yeah. Yeah.
I have a question about the last line, I think it was about stillness and usefulness. Was
Yeah.
what was
Yeah,
the thing
It
again?
was. It was, and it is stillness that makes them truly useful.
So, I'm trying to understand that rhyme. So part of my own thought is that, so for example, in the stillness of meditation, things may come up where, because of the clarity of being in meditation, your sort of memories or thoughts or realizations come and you're like, okay, if my mind wasn't quiet, I wouldn't have had this positive experience or helpful experience. And maybe with artists, they need stillness for inspiration. That was my interpretation, and I wanted to hear a bit more, maybe what Arthaketu was hinting at with that.
Yeah, I think he's got this this teaching of what he calls the greater mandala of aesthetic appreciation, and he says that I suppose that like kind of the way I see this line is so, and it is stillness that makes them truly useful.
Yes, I think it's the word useful.
It is empty spaces which give richness and significance to them. No, maybe I'll read the whole thing. It is in the pauses which make beautiful music of our lives. It is empty spaces which give richness and significance to them, and it is stillness that makes them truly useful. I kind of think sometimes it's a bit like we've got things the wrong way round. So I think our focus a lot of the time tends to be on activity. Yeah. We're very driven. We're a very driven society. We're very programmed to achieve, which is all fine and good, and sometimes we have to do that. But it creates a certain thing. It creates a lack of stillness. It's like kind of, it's all a bit focused and tight in terms of getting what we want. So in that sense, it's like we feel like we're being useful when we're doing. That's probably the background message. And it's a big message of society. I think this is why, to me, this is quite a radical teaching. Pauses and empty spaces. I'm telling you to do nothing is a radical teaching. Because that's the message. And you feel it, like kind of, sometimes I've had the sense of like, I've just sat and done nothing, and there's someone around me, and my sense is that they get very edgy. Yeah? They get edgy because I'm not doing anything. It's like, that might mean something, it might mean laziness or whatever. It's like, but I'm a Buddhist. It's like kind of, I'm actually quite like doing nothing. I enjoy it, it's satisfying. I don't have to do lots of things to justify my existence. So this is the switch, I think. Like when I said the thing about the greater mandala of aesthetic appreciation, what Sangharakshita is talking about is that there's a kind of space which is open, which is connected with beauty, which is not about doing, it's not about being useful, and that actually you try to live your life from that space. So here you could say that the word that he's using for that space is the stillness. So the more we're able to access that, the more we can be useful, but that usefulness comes from the stillness. Like I was thinking about this Buddhist centre, it's like, so I come in this morning, and obviously there's a kind of lovely team of people that kind of are setting things up. So it's like there are things to do. A Buddhist centre is a busy place. Sometimes you can end up doing a hell of a lot of work in a Buddhist centre. It can be really busy, sometimes it can be really stressful. But when that all gets too tight and too much of a sense of that we have to achieve and we have to do and we have to get it right and all the rest of it, then there's a problem, I think. So it's like, so you have to remember and you have to keep on reminding yourself, empty space. There's just space. There's space in my mind. I can access a space in my mind. And then everything comes from that, kind of from that space. So it's like quite a, I think it's quite a radical shift actually. Yeah. Right, I've got two at once. Yeah, go on, Max.
Yeah, it's not so much a question, but it's something that I'm interested in. I wondered if you could comment on. But I think it's important with these kind of practices that comes from the human essay. He mentioned about these empty spaces not being like a negation of something, but they're dynamic and there's something kind of creative. And I think that's really interesting and important. And I just would
it's just what happens, isn't it? It's kind of like, well, either you, like even like in the example that I gave, sitting on the couch, opening the windows, looking at the pigeon, it's like, well, I could either just go to sleep, yeah, it all becomes dull, or it's like as soon as I start to become interested, like kind of my awareness is just open and kind of I'm interested, it's like, wow, the world is kind of an amazing place. It's dynamic, it's alive. There is life kind of in front of me, kind of in this pigeon kind of moving around and the light changing. It's just what happens, isn't it? It's like, and I also think that that is an important thread to follow where there is life in your life. Like that might not always necessarily be completely compatible with your Buddhist practice, but it's vitally important. Where is there life? Where am I coming alive? Yeah, and can I? Well, maybe you need to check whether it's a good thing to follow or not. But it's so important, that sense of vitality, actually, kind of in life. So maybe, yeah, definitely.
It's probably not quite fair to confront you with something someone else said, but I remember a talk or an event with Lalita Ratna here a year ago or something like that. And he said something along the lines of, well, actually it's quite good to retreat from your senses, or kind of be less interested in sense objects. And I'm guessing it was more about being interested in the awareness. I don't know, I'm just guessing. And then there's this whole other thread, especially in secular formats, where the senses are the main tool of working. It's all about the senses.
Right.
How would you, I don't know, how would you deal with that?
I think they're just two different practices, and like, well, Sangharatsa says, doesn't he? Sangharatsa says as well. So this bit about the more frequent are those moments of interior silence and stillness, wherein transcending all sights and sounds, tastes and touches, we experience reality as it is. That's what he says. So I suppose it's like there is precedent in that in Buddhism, isn't there? As in, when you get into higher states of consciousness, I think this is what Lalita Ratna will be talking about next week, the senses drop off, don't they? It's like your experience of, or at least the way you experience the senses is quite different. It's kind of like the absorption when you get into higher states of consciousness. Well, it's so absorbed. It's kind of like you're probably not experiencing that much of the sense. It's said that the Buddha, when meditating, there's been times when the Buddha's been meditating, like a herd of elephants has come past, and he's just not heard them. So I suppose that's like in a very deep state of samadhi, isn't it? A very deep state of absorption. Whereas I suppose it's like there are other practices which are a lot more. The starting point is the senses, like kind of, well, the mindfulness of breathing is also that. So we're really paying attention to the senses. But I also think that what is interesting is, so if you're linking this with what Sangharatsa says, we experience reality as it is, it's like, so sense contact is arising, sounds, in what? And that that probably gets you a bit closer to reality as it is. it's kind of like it's all there, really. You can. Should I say it or not? Well, I suppose my sense is like, in terms of insight practice, there are two ways to go. One of them is that you pay attention to movement. That is sense contact, all the rest of it. Things that move, thoughts move, feelings move, emotions move, the content. Or you pay attention to awareness. Like one or the other takes you towards reality as it is. So you just choose, really. Or one thing starts to become significant. I think this is the interesting thing about the senses, is like, you start to pay attention to the senses, but something else can start to happen. Let's see what that is. There you go, that's a good place to finish, isn't it?